Welcome to Magic Arcanum! I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Etzen, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. Runes are an enchantment subtype added with Kaldheim, but the idea of magical engravings goes back to the game's earliest days, so I thought it would be fun to take a look at their history and then offer up some tips on how to use these new auras in your next deck. This will be the first time we've looked at a history of something other than a creature type, and I'm curious to know what you all think. So let me know down in the comments, and then consider becoming a patron so you can vote on topics for future videos. Alright, so first things first, what is a rune exactly, and what are their magical implications? Well, runes were a form of early written language, often carved into wood or stone. There was some variation across European cultures, but almost all of them avoided horizontal lines, which would have run into the grain of the wood and caused it to split. Now, the important part is that the word rune is used to distinguish these symbols from the individualized letters that you find in something like the Greek or Latin alphabet. In that way, they are a little bit closer to something like Egyptian hieroglyphics, where a single rune can represent an entire word, phrase, or concept. Many languages, including German, Welsh, and Old English, have similar root words for rune, meaning secret, whisper, mystery, or writing. It is believed that in the early days, runes were placed on tools and weapons to signify ownership, but over time they became much more personalized, with songs and stories encouraging the use of runes that would offer protection in battle, help ships navigate, and even facilitate childbirth. I tell you, Sven, I carved that rune, and then suddenly I had a child, 9 months later. From there, it's easy to see how these engravings, which were basically old-timey good luck charms, would eventually be thought to contain real magic. And that's a trait kept alive by modern storytelling, with the dwarves in Lord of the Rings using runes. But did you know the Bluetooth symbol is made up of the 2 runes that represent a Danish king who was alive during the time of the Vikings? Magic the Gathering has attempted to capture the mystical side of these engravings several times over the years. The very first reference I could find was in the flavor text of Jalum Tome from Antiquities, which tells us that Urza learned a lot from this book, but even he couldn't fully comprehend its mystical runes. Shortly after that, Legends gave us Bartel Rune Axe, a giant warrior with vigilance who cannot be the target of aura spells. And man, that's unfortunate because all of the runes in Kaldheim are auras. Okay, so the first 2 at-bats were strikeouts, but Magic is about to get on base with their third crack at runes, with Rune Sword. This artifact from the Dark predates modern equipment by more than a decade, but it still manages to achieve a similar effect. It enhances the attack power of your creature and will effectively cremate anything it kills. I'm not sure if that's worth a total of 9 mana, but at least it has art by the legendary Christopher Rush. Runed Arch from Ice Age can make your creatures with power 2 or less unblockable for a turn, an ability also found on some early Magic dwarves, connecting the creature type to this style of magic, and we'll see that happen again when we visit Kaldheim. Ancient Runes from Tempest is the first enchantment to depict a rune and its magic in action, which in this case is blasting somebody in the ass, because that's what passed for comedy in 1997. Urza's Saga decided enchantments were a great way to show the power of runes, and gave us a cycle devoted to their warding nature. There's a rune of protection for each color, 1 for artifacts, and 1 for lands, but the best card on this theme is Mother of Runes, who's actually a creature. Mom would go on to be reprinted several times over the years and still finds a home in many commander decks. Read the Runes and Epheto Runecaster were the first blue cards to depict runes. They focus more on the arcane knowledge side of things, offering you the sweet prize of freshly drawn cards if you can solve their self-contained puzzles. This far, everything has taken place on Dominaria, but it shouldn't surprise you to know runes can be found all across the multiverse. Rune Tail is a legendary fox monk from Kamigawa, and some of the great artifacts of Mirrodin had runes etched into their surface. The Plane of Lorwyn also has runes present. There's the Rune'd Halo, another white enchantment that offers protection to its user. By picking what this card works against, you are in effect customizing the rune just like they did with their weapons and tools thousands of years ago. And there's Runes of the Dais, a multicolor enchantment that conditionally grants abilities. This is similar to how the runes on Kaldheim work, and I'm wondering if the designers went back to this one for inspiration. Runeclaw Bear was added to the game to replace the classic Grizzly Bears, because it was always confusing having a plural name but being a single card and acting as a single creature. Kind of bummed this guy wasn't reprinted in Kaldheim, actually. Let's pop on over to Zendikar to see if they have runes. Yup, sure do. The hedrons that dot the landscape are covered in them. Some are even trapped to discourage anyone from messing with the magic that contains the Eldrazi. Rune-Scarred Demon is the first mono-black card to show us how that color uses runes, and as you might expect, it's to gain more power. While white uses runes for protection, and blue uses them for controlling the flow of magic, black's runes have a trend of almost cheating, and we'll come back to that. On Innistrad, you can find Runechanter's Pike, an equipment that seems to be imbued with traces of all the magic you've ever used in your life. Havengul Runebinder is a blue creature who uses runes to enhance the strength of your zombies, which makes it feel like it should be a black card, but on this plane there are many blue zombies, and they are the result of mad science rather than the more traditional, old-fashioned ghoul raising. When we returned to Ravnica, we were assaulted by the Key Runes. This cycle of 10 artifacts helped your draft deck run smoothly, but it felt like there was one in every pack, and I got a little tired of seeing them after a while. Anyway, the Key Runes were cool because they could become creatures for a turn with a small investment of mana, and each guild had their own twist on it, which made them flavorful as well as useful. Runewing once again focuses on the wisdom you can find in runes, while Skinbrand Goblin captures the more, let's say, unrefined applications. Theros is a plane full of enchantments, but none connected to runes. Instead, we'll find a few creatures with rune-like markings on their skin, often attributed to messages from the gods. That brings us to Tarkir, where a cycle of rune marks were an easy way to buff up one of your creatures and then grant it an additional ability if you also controlled a permanent in another of the clan's colors. Remember earlier when I said how black cards using runes can feel a little bit like cheating? Well, the black rune mark can grant your creature Death Touch, which means not only does it make your creature bigger, it also turns it into a walking removal spell. It probably wasn't the best out of the 5. Adding flying to a prowess creature could result in a huge burst of damage out of nowhere, for example, but I do like how black can turn even its smallest creature into a really dangerous one by tapping into the power of runes. Things were pretty quiet on the rune front for a while after that, until we returned once more to Ravnica, where we saw the Azorius use them first under the instruction of Dovin Baan, and then in their own defense against the invading Eternal Army. Modern Horizons gave us one more rune-flavored treat with Giver of Runes, an updated version of the classic Mother of Runes. This core cleric is from Zendikar, and so she has learned to offer protection from colorless sources because her home is known for the colorless threat of the Eldrazi. So that was the history of runes up until Kaldheim. We saw very few that were connected to weapons or tools or artifacts at all, really, and instead the game seemed to focus more on their mystical and sometimes confusing nature. I would say at this point runes are also pretty strongly associated with protection, mostly thanks to that massive cycle from Urza's Saga, and Tarkir did a pretty good job showing how runes can be used to enhance the strength of an individual creature and grant them new abilities. Kaldheim takes all of these ideas and gives us another cycle along with a few supporting cards. First, there's the runes themselves. Once again, we get one for each color, and once again, the black one grants Death Touch. This time, though, the runes are much more flexible in what they target. Notice they can go on any permanent, and their ability will affect a creature or equipment. I have a few ideas on how we can abuse this, and I'll share those in a moment. Runeforge Champion lets you search your graveyard and library for a rune card and put it into your hand. He then cuts the casting cost of your runes in half and eliminates the need for colored mana. This is deceptively powerful because you are, in effect, drawing a card that is never a land, and then when you actually play the rune, you get to draw again. Rune'd Crown is similar. For 3 mana, you get an equipment that lets you search your hand, library, or graveyard for a rune and put it straight into play. And when you do that, you still get to draw another card from the rune itself. I also want to point out how much Burning Rune Demon is like our old friend Rune Scarred Demon. It lets you get a card out of your deck, although this time you have a little less control over what it is exactly. Graven Lore and Weathered Runestone also depict runes in the traditional Nordic style, carved in stone and used to record information or imbue an object with a little bit of good luck. Now, switching back to the auras, I think Kaldheim does a really good job showing how tools and weapons and armor are enchanted by runes in this culture. Nobody's getting blasted in the ass by these runes. Instead, they project a much more serious and threatening vibe, which fits with the tone of the set as everyone gears up for this impending doomscar. Now, as cool as these cards are, what can you actually do with them? Here are some things to consider. Since you can enchant any permanent, a bunch of things that can become creatures suddenly start to look really good. For example, lands. You can enchant Crawling Barrens from Zendikar Rising and draw your free card. Then on a later turn, perhaps after you cast Doomscar, you activate the land and attack with it as a buffed up creature before it goes back to being a land on your opponent's turn. Your Walking Landscape is safe from sorcery speed removal, making it a much less risky place to park your runes. You can also use this trick with any other card that can turn your lands into creatures. Nissa loves to do this, either as a planeswalker or with her own forms of enchantment. And while we're talking about enchantments, the gods from Theros Beyond Death are another great candidate to carry runes. They'll add to their devotion and eventually help them come to life as creatures. Since they are indestructible, they are very difficult for your opponent to deal with. Riddle Form is another potential target, although he'll need a bit more support. The first rune you aim at him, though, will turn him into a creature for that turn, giving you, say, a 3/3 lifelink flyer on turn 4. Vehicles also can become creatures and reap the benefit of runes. Thundering Chariot already has Trample and First Strike. Why not give it Death Touch as well, and then carve a path straight through to your opponent's life total? The best piece of equipment in Standard to bear a rune is probably Shadow Spear. It already grants lifelink and trample and +1/+1, and it is cheap to equip. Give it flying or death touch, and now you've got a weapon to slay a god. But maybe you're not playing in the sandbox that is Standard. What else can you do with your runes? How about tossing them on a Gideon? Yeah, when he becomes his indestructible creature self, he'll have all the powers of the runes. Same with Sarkhan when he turns into a dragon, and once again your opponent will have a very small window to deal with these guys. There aren't many hexproof threats in Standard, but if you go to Historic, there are some merfolk who might make a good candidate for carrying runes. Add in something like Ancestral Mask, and you're on the path of a modern Boggles list. So yeah, get creative with your runes. That's what the Vikings did thousands of years ago. Why not keep their spirit alive as you forge your own history with these exciting new auras? Let me know how you plan to use runes down in the comments. Then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya!